This series introduces Youth Participatory Action Research, or YPAR, an approach that empowers young people to lead research projects addressing issues that impact their lives. YPAR groups identify and investigate topics that matter to them. Topics cover a wide range, such as improving teacher-student relationships or the need for free and low-cost spaces for youth in a community. Groups spend time identifying a topic, which may include collecting information from a community or examining existing data to understand what is known about the topic. After identifying a topic, youth gather data, for example, surveys, interviews, or art, and draw on this evidence to advocate for changes that matter to them. Sometimes youth enact the change themselves through peer education or other forms of youth-led programming. In other cases, youth advocate to adults who have decision-making power to change policies, refine practices, create programs, and/or develop enduring products. YPAR fosters collaboration between youth and adults, enabling youth to develop key skills, to advocate for change, and to build agency. YPAR also supports adults in schools, communities, and other youth-serving systems to benefit from insider expertise of youth in creating youth-driven solutions to issues that matter to them. More information about the steps involved in a YPAR process is covered in our first video, What is YPAR? This video covers the sixth stage of a YPAR process, taking action. This process ensures that the data young people collected and the analysis they did is shared with others. In many cases, YPAR groups are strategic in who they share their findings with and select an audience who has the power to change or address the topic or opportunity. Disseminating youth's findings, often in the form of a set of recommendations, is a hallmark of YPAR efforts. In this video, we start by considering the needs young people identified during data collection and discuss how to support youth in developing recommendations from their analysis of the data. Then, we consider which audiences most need to hear the findings and are most likely to respond. Lastly, we introduce ideas for disseminating findings and making change, offering examples from past YPAR projects. We also discuss different potential areas of impact: creating, changing, or implementing a policy, adjusting a process, changing or establishing new programs, or developing an enduring product. After your YPAR team has analyzed and interpreted the data, your group should develop an action plan of 1 to 3 proposed actions based on the data you collected and analyzed. Your group can brainstorm answers to questions like, what does our data tell us about what youth or our community need? Or, what did the data highlight as a primary issue or opportunity? It can be helpful to spend some time thinking about the specific action steps that would help realize this plan. Consider which ideas the YPAR team can realistically complete in the remaining time, which ones they care about most, which solutions best match the data, and which actions require others to carry out. Sometimes young people need time, specific prompting, or arts-based activities to articulate the needs identified in their research. The action plan should include the steps the group will take and the partners they will need to engage to make a change in the school or community. Let's look at an example. A YPAR group in a high school in Colorado conducted surveys with students to study the issue of a lack of supportive adult relationships in their school. While 50% of students said they had at least one adult they could trust, they found that 50% of students didn't have that important relationship. The group decided that they wanted to increase trusting relationships between teachers and students. One idea for action that the group came up with was to offer teachers easy ideas from students on how to build trust, like spending the first days of school building connections before jumping into content. Another idea that the group came up with was to have teachers stand at the door to welcome students into the classroom. Your YPAR team should think about who the audiences are for the actions the group identified. Some audiences may help the action to be approved, such as school administrators or city council members. And some audiences will need to change their own way of working for young people to experience the change, such as teachers or people who work in a youth clinic. Thinking about the audience will influence how you approach developing your action steps. Be sure that the audiences that you select have the position or power to do something to move your recommendations from ideas to action. This can be a great time for youth-adult partnership. If you are unfamiliar with your audiences, you may want to do some additional research. If you have a youth researcher who is an advisor to the city council, leverage their expertise about the process of getting in front of that audience. If adults have more time or connections to learn the process of presenting to unfamiliar audiences, have them take the lead. For instance, if your findings point to the need to change a school rule or policy, an audience of a principal or school dean would be most appropriate to change the rule. However, work may need to be also done with teachers to explain to them why this new rule is important and how to best enforce it in line with the research findings. If the findings point to a need that can be addressed by decision makers in your community, such as creating a youth center in your town, the relevant audiences may be a city council, town board, or recreation district. If the findings point to a need to build broad support for the change, the audience may be other youth leaders. Consider broadening your audiences to other adults or organizations who might also support the actions your group identified. As your group is preparing to share what they found with an audience, they will first need to create a summary of their findings. The most common form is through creating and delivering a presentation. One of the actions can be to create a presentation, another action might be to meet with the principal, and another might be to meet with the school board. If your group chooses to summarize your findings into a presentation, take time to practice so that everyone feels comfortable with the material. There are other ways YPAR groups have shared their summaries or actions through art, photo exhibit, video, writing a news article, or hosting a training. You might also consider how to get the results integrated into existing reports of the school or organization, such as an annual report, school board meeting notes, or a school improvement plan. When deciding how to summarize the work, your YPAR group might consider the type of summary that might be most compelling to the audience. This is also a good time to remember that different members of the group may have different strengths and talents. Some people may create the presentation while others do the presenting. Let's return to the example about Colorado. Given their goal to increase trusting relationships between teachers and students, the group decided that their principal was an audience that has power to help influence school culture. The group prepared a summary in the form of a presentation, reached out to the principal's administrative assistant to get on the principal's schedule, and then presented their research and their recommendations to the principal. The group presented about their process of deciding on a topic, their research methods and findings, and their recommendations. The principal offered to have the students design a half-day professional development for teachers on practices they can integrate into their day to enhance student-teacher relationships. This professional development was planned for the start of the next school year. Sometimes the group doesn't have a specific change they want to see to address the topic, but they do want to share their research and findings with others. Sometimes these opportunities come up naturally, such as sharing the YPAR team's work at an existing conference. Other times, the group may need to do some research to identify potential outlets to share their work. In this case, the YPAR group might host a town hall, a community art show, or present at a local, state, or national conference. The event could include an opportunity for attendees to brainstorm potential changes based on the research findings. It is important to think strategically about your plan and advertise the event to ensure you have the right people in the room who can help move your work forward. YPAR can change people's assumptions about youth and what they care about, which can support future collaborative projects. One example of an alternative form of dissemination was a group of middle and high school youth all participating in a diversion program in a smaller frontier community. The young people wanted town police officers to better understand youth's mental health experiences and created a photo voice project. They connected with the police chief, who their adult facilitator had a good relationship with, who allowed them to host a photo exhibition in the police department one evening. All the town police officers were invited and most attended. Youth spoke about their hopes for more respectful interactions with the police. Since YPAR has been used to support community change efforts, past examples can be helpful to explore the breadth of what changes might be possible. In the past, YPAR groups have created new policies or changed existing policies. Groups have created new processes or practices. Many groups have modified existing or created new youth-oriented programming. Finally, groups have created lasting and enduring products that can be used even when the group is no longer active. We will give examples of each of these different actions in the next section. Often, YPAR findings point to a need to change an existing policy or implement a new policy. A policy is a written-down rule or guideline. Policies guide decision-making at the school, city, state, and federal level. One example of a policy change spurred by a YPAR group was the addition of a new bus route connecting a local school to youth-oriented recreation in a city to increase youth's access to these facilities. This new bus route was an enduring commitment from a city council and transportation board to increase youth's access to these spaces. Another example of a policy change that was initiated by a YPAR group was to change a school policy to allow students to display cultural flags at school. This policy change, approved by the school principal and district school board, allowed youth to demonstrate their cultural pride. Leveraging your YPAR group's recommendations to create new or change existing policies can take extra time and effort. The process often involves collaborating with decision makers or other organizations within your community to identify potential policy solutions, garner support for the solution through community education, petitions or letters of support, speaking at multiple meetings where the policy is discussed, and working with the people responsible for translating the policy into action. Timelines of schools or city governments might be slower or not match those of your YPAR group. To allow for follow-up and accountability, some young people might need to continue for a longer time or return after the YPAR project is completed to be able to attend meetings or speak at key events. However, this action process ensures that the group leaves an enduring impact to address areas of need within your community. Sometimes the findings youth uncover in YPAR point to the need to change a process in a school or community. If we think of a policy as changing a rule, we can think of a process as changing the way things are typically done. At a high school in California, a group's YPAR results indicated a problem with student-teacher relationships in providing culturally relevant teaching. Working with an outside agency to train them, youth learned about the characteristics of culturally relevant teaching and how to do teacher observations with positive feedback, emphasizing what was working in the classroom. Youth offered a voluntary feedback cycle with interested teachers, including pre- and post-observation meetings with the teacher. Teachers who participated reported that the observations were helpful in improving their teaching. If your group decides to create new programming, this can also take extra effort. New programming often involves additional funding, changes in job duties for adult staff, and organizational support for this change to take effect. One YPAR group identified that there was a need for peer mediation services at their school, with peers who could be available to meet with students to address emotional or interpersonal challenges. The school committed to creating a peer mediation program. Peer mediators received training and then were available during their off period to meet with students who needed peer-based support. This new programming, offered by a school, was the result of a YPAR group's advocacy effort. At a high school in California, YPAR findings showed that English as a second language students felt disconnected from school activities. One idea in their action plan was to develop a mentoring program with students learning English and to host monthly open mics that specifically invited students and encouraged them to participate in the language they spoke at home. The mentoring program was successful in increasing connection, and the mentors and mentees worked together to host the open mics, which were immediately highly attended events. A final way that a YPAR group can create lasting impact is to develop an enduring product. This might include developing and recording a training, developing a toolkit or lesson plan, or a physical structure or place that addresses the issues or opportunities identified in the findings. In our first example, we shared how a group of students in Colorado wanted to enhance student-teacher relationships. They created a day-long training for school faculty and staff. The group could have considered also translating the workshop contents into a video that could be used over multiple years to strengthen relationships longer term. Another YPAR group in Colorado identified through interviews with teens attending a youth program that teens felt very stressed and were often turning to nicotine or other substances to cope. The group did some research and decided to create a walking labyrinth outside of their community center so that youth could practice positive coping to manage their stress. When thinking about creating an enduring product, it is very helpful to have a champion within the setting who will help sustain the effort. If your group decides to create a physical structure like the walking labyrinth example, your group will need to work with leaders of the space to ensure your group has permission to construct something and that it can stay in place for a while. An important part of the action step in YPAR is follow-up, accountability, and assessing impact. After youth share their findings and recommendations, it's important to follow up on what happens next. Did decision makers respond? Were changes made? Or did new opportunities emerge? This step helps youth and adults reflect on whether the action had the intended effect, what worked well, and what challenges remain. By following up and assessing impact, YPAR groups can hold systems accountable, learn from the experience, and decide whether additional advocacy or action is needed, reinforcing that youth research is meant to lead to meaningful and lasting change. Regardless of how your YPAR group decides to take action, you will want to plan to celebrate key milestones through the action phase. Celebrate each success. Do not wait until everything you want is accomplished. At the conclusion of your time together, debrief on lessons learned and celebrate the group and all the milestones achieved. Some groups celebrate by having a special meal or outing in the community. Plan for time to acknowledge and celebrate each member's contributions to the group and the final project or action. You will also want to spend some time reflecting on the knowledge, skills, and relationships the team members have gained throughout this process. One way to do this is to collaboratively create a resume blurb that youth can use to describe their accomplishments and what they are now able to do as a result. Another way to do this is for the youth team to create a visual map of the people they worked with throughout the process that helped make the change happen and discuss what they have learned through these new connections. Even if your change wasn't adopted, it is important to celebrate and honor everyone's contributions. This video summarizes the sixth step in the YPAR process, taking action, by focusing on how YPAR teams make and enact an action plan based on their findings, including sharing recommendations with audiences who have the power to create change. The series of modules is a collaboration between the Colorado School of Public Health, the University of California, Berkeley, and the YPAR network. Funding for this series is provided by the Bezos Family Foundation. The principal investigators of this grant are Emily J. Ozer and Linda Sprague Martinez. The UC Berkeley YPAR Hub offers foundational materials, tools, and lesson plans to support your project. These resources focus on essential topics like youth-adult partnerships, community engagement, and promoting equality, which are vital to the YPAR process.